Welcome back to Launch Your Light, a podcast that covers the soul and strategy of running a business and sharing your heart's work with the world. I am so excited to bring another phenomenal guest onto this show. We can hear about her soul work and the beautiful stuff she is doing out in the world. Today we have on Vesi Jones. She is a licensed social worker with over 10 years of clinical experience. She has her own private practice in Wellesley, Mass, where she meets with clients both in person and virtually, so needed these days. Vesi specializes in anxiety, depression, and relationship issues. Can I get a what's up for that? She is passionate about helping women who are feeling overwhelmed and burned out. She helps them break free from perfectionism and people pleasing. Oh my God, I can't wait to talk to you. Stop shooting on themselves and to learn how to thrive in their personal and professional lives. Oh my God, Vesi, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to chat with you today.
Yes. Okay. So here we are. I like to go from soul to strategy. You've listened to a few of these episodes here.
Mhm.
I want to know, what was the thing in life that had you called to this? Like, what called you to this work?
Well, I'll try to keep it short. So I'm originally from Bulgaria, and I unfortunately grew up, in a family with substance use and domestic violence and all the stuff. And at the time, mental health services were pretty much non-existent when I was growing up, or at least nobody talked about it. Maybe they existed, I just never heard about it. There was no such thing as a school counselor. There was no such thing as hotline to call. Again, maybe there existed. I was not aware of that. Um, and thankfully, I call her kind of my savior angel. Was a English tutor who I started meeting with in 11th grade, who basically saw something in me that I think I didn't see. And I knew that I love learning. I knew I wanted to continue my education past high school. I was going to a foreign language school. So I was learning English. And I knew that I did not want to go to school in Bulgaria, or maybe even in Europe, because the way the system is set up is you have to pick a path and kind of stick with it. And so I
Hmm.
was very attracted to the liberal arts um, system of education that the US offers. I had several friends who were applying to also go to school, and actually one of my best friends went ahead before me. I took a year off and worked, and then joined her at the same, went up in the same school, funny enough. So I had some time to kind of think about and figure out what I wanted to do. I was attracted to psychology pretty much in high school. We had a psychology class, of all things, and it was the first time that I kind of thought or figured out that, oh, there's a way to learn about people's behavior and what makes people do certain things, and often things that maybe not so nice, but also things that are nice. And so that kind of sparked that initial, spark. And then I came to college. I came to a southern Missouri, all the way from Bulgaria,
Oh my
um,
God.
to a tiny little women's college called Kari College, which
Wow.
a 2-year college at the time. So I was there for 2 years. I obviously it was kind of the core curriculum, so I took a variety of courses, but multiple psychology courses, and absolutely loved it, and just wanted to know more. And that's kind of how it all started. And then I transferred to Smith College in Northampton, so that's what brought me to Massachusetts.
Wow.
Continued with the psychology background. I got kind of pulled into research, which I also really enjoyed. I often joke, and I have the two parts of the brain. I have kind of the emotion part, but I also love numbers, and I have like the analytical side too. And I think that's what drew me to research. Um, a lot of my professors had their PhDs, so of course there was a little bit of like, well, clinical psych is the path to go. And so I was on that path. I got a research job. I took the GREs. I did all the things that I had to do, and then I started looking into the programs, and I just knew deep down, as much as I liked research, I knew I wanted to work with people, and I work with people directly. I want to help people. Again, I've been fortunate enough to have people help me along the way and kind of pave a path for myself, and so I felt called, to do the same. And so the more I looked into those programs, the more, I mean, they, out of a 5-6 year program, they maybe had 1 or 2 years of actual clinical work. And I just
Mhm.
felt, oh my gosh, that's not it. So 6 months before the applications were due, I basically had a massive crisis because I realized all the things I've been working for, it's not going to get me where I want to go.
Mm.
So my colleague, who was also applying to graduate school, but she had worked in the field, the more she listened to me kind of freaking out, the more at one point she said, have you looked at social work? Because sounds like what you're describing is a lot more like that. And I said,
Mm.
what do you mean? Because again, coming from Bulgaria, the only thing I can think of social work is the equivalent of DCF, basically. And
Right,
I knew that's
right.
not what I'm drawn to do. But once I pulled up a couple of the programs, and again, very lucky that several of the very strong programs are right here in Boston,
Cool.
it just clicked. It just was like, oh my gosh, this is what I've been looking for. I just didn't know, I didn't have a name for it. And so I kind of scrapped the plan, changed gears, and ended up going to social work school instead. And I loved it. It definitely felt like the right fit. We started clinical training basically like the first week of first year. You get thrown
Right.
right in, which was obviously a little scary, but also amazing because you immediately get that hands-on experience while you're also learning, obviously, all the theoretical and all the other stuff in class. So anyway, from there, 2 years of school, and then I did about a year of inpatient work on the North Shore, and then I ended up at McLean Hospital in Belmont. And I actually was fortunate enough to float for 2.5 years, which basically meant I covered the other social workers and psychologists vacations, but I
Cool.
got to go through every single unit at the hospital, which was amazing. Again, learning experience, and I met so many awesome people, but also allowed me to kind of slowly start to distill, okay, what do I actually like doing? Because none of us can do it all, and we all have kind of our, closer paths. When I first started grad school and kind of clinical training, I definitely was more drawn towards substance use because of, family experience, but quickly realized it's not, it's hitting too close to home. And so I needed to kind of
Mm.
shift gears a little bit. So yeah, and then from there, I worked at the partial program for over a year, and then I had started my private practice while at McLean for a couple of years because I wanted that long-term work.
Yeah.
The issue with both the coverage and the partial program was relatively short-term work, and I enjoyed that too. It was kept things interesting. There was never a dull moment, never a dull day, but I miss kind of more of that long-term relationship with clients and really
Yeah.
helping them make those changes in their lives. So I did that for a couple of years, and then I had my son end of 2019. Took the maternity. Then I needed to take a little more time off, so I left the full-time position. And then COVID happened, and then all
Hmm.
the plans went out the window of what I thought was going to happen after
Yep.
my slightly extended leave. So obviously I had to stay home. All the daycares were closed. Kept
Yep.
my son home, and then I had a few former clients reach out periodically, kept saying, okay, when are you reopening? When are you reopening? And so I finally reopened back fall of 2020 as kind of my second iteration of my practice, I call it. And then it just kind of slowly grew from there. Obviously, daycare started to open. He started daycare, so I was able to start to add a little more hours. And then there we are, 4 years later, or almost over 4 years later. I have my own office, which I love, and get to see people in person. Thank goodness, I love the in person. And yeah, sorry, that was a very long answer, but hopefully kind of
Oh
covers
no.
the.
Don't say sorry. This is what we're here for. Okay, my brain wants to go in a million ways, but first I want to say we've got listeners from Missouri. So, yeah, we have listeners in 150 cities and
Excellent.
20 countries. So they're listening. Okay. The next thing that came up was how many of us as coaches or psychologists or therapists got on that path because we wanted to understand our childhoods.
Mhm.
Like, this is a vibe. So, right away, what advice do you have to someone who's like, maybe they're like a teen, just like you were, like a teen listening to this, or a young 20s, or I mean, really any age, and you want to kind of look at this like, uh, what would be some advice to someone who wants to kind of sort out their past and what they went through, not professionally, but even like maybe to get their own counseling, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, a couple of things. I think one, I think my biggest message always is to all my clients and even friends and anybody else that you're never alone, and it takes one person. It could take one person to really change your life and change your trajectory. And again, I know this sounds like so kind of movie like, but really that's how it felt for me. Like my being able to connect with my tutor, who basically kind of took me under her wing and helped me, prepare for the applications, and like honestly even just gave me the confidence that
Yeah.
you can do this, because there was enough naysayers. There was enough of one, taking the gap year was a big deal. Everybody felt that's it, nothing, she's not going to do anything. Like usually you don't take a gap year, you kind of either you go to school or you don't. So there was a lot of kind of doubt and questioning around that piece, but I knew that was the right thing for me. And honestly, I also had to work for a year to save enough to buy my plane ticket. I mean, so
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
had to do it for financial reasons, and also to get ready.
Hmm.
And again, she was not a therapist. Again, she was a tutor, but still, again, saw something in me and helped me kind of push myself and get out of my shell and really kind of pursue and see another path. Because I think that's the toughest thing, right? When we're going through a difficult situation, right, we often feel there's no way out. And I guess that's often my message. There's always a way out, right? It's just
Hmm.
connecting with that one person, if whoever, it could be a neighbor, it could be a friend, it could be a coach, a therapist, a tutor, a teacher,
Yeah.
anybody that sees you as you.
Hmm.
Because my biggest challenge was, and growing up, and I think that's often for a lot of people going through those situations, is, a lot of people around me, like could be neighbors, could be relatives. There was always kind of like, oh my God, what's going to come out of these kids? I have a younger brother. And, in almost in a way, you feel this weight of like, oh, my family's background is going to now define,
Yeah.
my future. And I think there was a little bit of that stubborn part of me that was like, no,
Hmm.
not
Yep.
gonna happen. I'm gonna prove everybody wrong. Like it's not gonna. I don't want to be a statistic. It's not. I'm not gonna be a statistic, right? So there's a little bit of, I think, in my case, I think a little bit of that personality was just there of just
Yeah.
like no. Um, and then when I got to college, I was very fortunate. The school in Missouri is actually owned by a women's organization called PEO.
Cool.
And one of the chapters basically like adopted me, quote unquote. There's like local chapters throughout the US and Canada. And then one of the women from that chapter, like again, took me under her wing, and she's basically become my American mom. Like she's been to all my
Oh.
graduations. I've stayed
Oh.
with them for vacations. Her husband walked me down the aisle. I mean,
Oh
they're
my
basically my
God.
family here. And again, I see her and my tutor as like my two angels that, came along. And so that's the other piece. We never know, right? We never know who's gonna kind of extend that helping hand or help us kind of guide us to move forward. So to anybody out there who's going through stuff, who's struggling, who may feel like, there's no way out, I guess I always argue there's always a way. There's always a way, and you're not alone. You're never alone. There's always somebody out there in this wild world that can kind of help us get out there. And our families should not define who we are, and our family histories do not define who we become as people.
Oh, that part needs to be repeated right there. Everything you just said in the last bit is so much advice for people. And, the more and more I learn about people, because I'm a coach, so I'm not
Mhm.
a therapist or a psychologist, but, we hear a lot of the same stuff.
Mhm. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. There's a lot of overlap. There's overlap.
Right?
Yes.
And it's like, the more you learn about people, you're like, wow, everyone comes from a family that's like got some stuff going on in there. And they're like, I feel like that is our soul journey here, right? Is to come into these families and then find these guides. I'm so glad you brought up the guide thing because I teach marketing through storytelling, actually.
Mm,
And there,
okay.
the frame of storytelling really helps us take an objective look on our stories, but also understand like this ancient template and how to get
Mhm,
our work out. And a big part of that is the guide. So you have a character, and then there's usually a need or a want or a desire or a situation that happens.
mhm.
Sometimes and usually there's a villain of the story or an antagonist, right? And then a guide enters. It's always
Mhm,
like, and it can be a teacher, like you said, a teacher, a neighbor, a person on the bus that just looks at you and asks you this question, and
mhm,
everything changes. And I think you just beautifully demonstrated how this guy, this person in your life literally changed everything, the trajectory of your life probably.
Mhm.
Oh,
Yeah,
it's so beautiful.
absolutely.
So for anyone hearing that and listening to your story, Bessie, right? You can look at that like storytelling template and just kind of go like, "Oh, who is the character here? What was the background? What was the situation? What's the need? And oh, who has been a guide in my life?" And I'm sure you all have one. Okay, this is not about storytelling, so I'm going to keep going. But you just demonstrated that so beautifully. I was like, I'm pulling it up. Okay, I want to go back to the words that the words that you said you love specifically to help with. You specialize in anxiety, depression, and relationship issues. Those are very specific. What brought you to those issues, emotions, and situations?
Yeah, great question. I think it's an ongoing process. I think, especially when I reopened my practice, I did some trainings and some courses, again, to just kind of more of the logistical side of things, but and even just marketing. And I'm going back to what you were sharing. Obviously, how do I get the word out that here I am, available? And because I was out of the hospital, setting at that point, and I'm in a different area. I'm in the Metro West area versus Belmont. So I wanted to establish kind of more myself in this area. So I did a lot of work around kind of this, establishing a niche or however you pronounce that word. For the love of me, I can't pronounce it right. And I think it just kind of came natural. Like I found the people it's almost like the people that I was attracting and the people that I most enjoyed working with were within that domain and were struggling with those issues. I think some of it is because of my training. It kind of aligns nicely. So my background is in DBT, which is dialectical behavior therapy. Then I've done some CBT, which is cognitive behavioral therapy. And then more recently, I lean into ACT, which is acceptance and commitment therapy. So I do a lot of work around mindfulness, around self-compassion, communication, all of those things. And so those kind of three broad topics, kind of aligned nicely. And I think it's a good fit with my personality. It's a good fit with my style. Kind of my running joke with people is that I'm not a nodding therapist. I'm not going to sit and nod for 50 minutes. I'm very active. As you can probably see, I'm pretty chatty. And so I'm pretty active in sessions. And again, when people are struggling with those things, that seems to fit pretty well. And so it just kind of naturally, I think, came to
Hmm.
me. But it was a challenge because I've worked with so many different populations and so many different issues over the years. It took a little bit of kind of soul searching and some time to figure out, okay, who really kind of lights me up to work with, and who do I can help the most. And so that's kind of how I landed there.
Also, just with those topics, anxiety, depression, relationship issues, you're going to be pretty busy for the next decade at least.
Yes.
Let's just break some of these down. Like,
Mhm.
how many people in America have anxiety right now? Like, this
Mhm.
is some deep stuff, right?
It's a
And
lot.
depression coming out of these COVID eras, like we just said, like, oh,
Yes.
5 years has gone by. It's like,
Mm.
what? So,
Yes.
this is actually a background conversation I have with a lot of people, and I'm sure
Mhm.
you're hearing it in your sessions. A lot of people are still feeling isolated and
Mhm.
completely, really like not haven't even started to heal from
Mhm.
those pandemic years and what has happened to people in their life, what has happened to our country. And I'm sure you're hearing this behind closed doors. It's
Yeah.
like, what's available for people? I mean, of course, talking to you and doing that, but you know what I mean? It's almost like, don't you feel like we haven't even started to heal what was ripped open
It's so
during?
yeah, it's so interesting you bring this up because I just had a conversation with a couple of clients around this piece, and especially beginning of the year. Of course, I'm not big into resolutions or all of that, but of course, it's a natural start. I do touch base with people around intentions or
Yeah.
certain things they want to work on, even with me. As we're moving forward, kind of out of the post holidays and everything. And yes, I had a conversation with several people recently that I think the pandemic, I don't think we still have quite processed what that was like. And I think for a lot of people, there was a little bit of, okay, let's move on now. Let's just keep going. Thank goodness that's done. Um,
Hmm. Hmm.
However, there was a lot of, I do see a lot of trickling effects down. I agree with you. I think the isolation, I often joke too that people forgot how to be people. I mean, I hate
Yeah.
to say it, but everybody got so accustomed to do everything online, right? Everything is
Hmm.
text and email and posting on social media. That's why I love seeing people in person too,
Hmm.
because I have so many clients that are so burned out with Zoom that they
Yeah.
actually are very happy when I say that I see people in person. And I love it because the energy and the connection that you feel in the room, it can never be replicated on Zoom.
Yeah.
Telehealth, I think, has been a blessing because again,
Yeah.
it still has given access to people. I have several clients that I work with. I've never met in person. They're only telehealth because they live further out and they
Yeah.
can't come to me. So that's a benefit for them. Obviously, if telehealth didn't exist, they wouldn't have gotten the help they needed. So that's great. But I personally am a big believer and a big advocate for in person because it allows people also to decompress driving to my office and then driving from my office back to whatever they're doing. It gives them
Yeah.
time to kind of process what's been discussed versus if you're home going
Oh,
from
yeah.
meeting to meeting, it's much harder. So those are they're kind of small and subtle things. But again, I hear so much difficulties, I think, around dating, around friendships,
Yeah.
around, marriages. A lot of marriages took a big hit during COVID. I mean, all of a sudden partners cooped up together 24/7 was not so great for
Yeah.
some people. So there's been a lot, and I think we're still kind of seeing these ripple effects, and especially here in New England, the winter's obviously challenging, with the long dark days and
Mhm.
cold days. So definitely, I do start to see the depression start to creep up a little bit more in the winter months for sure.
Woo! With the relationships too, because I feel like it's so fun that it goes from anxiety to depression. Of course, I'm like, this is fun. This is fun for me to talk about. I love this stuff. Anxiety to depression, then relationships. How did that come into your little triangle?
Well, relationships are across the board. Again, regardless, I think of, again, whether you have a kind of clinical diagnosis or not, and I work with people across the spectrum. You don't need to have a mental health diagnosis to go to therapy. I just want to put that out there because that's
Right,
one
right.
big misconception, or often I think what holds people back from getting some help is kind of this feeling of, I'm not that bad, or it's not that serious, or it's um so I just want to get that out of the way as well.
Mhm.
And then relationships is what, our whole lives are built on various relationships, or one
Yeah,
hopes. We're
yeah.
social beings. And I think that was the problem with the pandemic. We were not meant to be locked up in our houses. We're not meant to be isolated. We're
Nope.
social beings. We're meant to be with other people.
Yep.
Again, going back to even the energy piece, we feed off each other's energy. We need the physical touch, right?
Hmm.
I mean, research has shown like a 6-second kiss or a 20-second hug
Yeah.
can literally kind of reset your nervous system and kind of kicking the parasympathetic and calm down the sympathetic nervous system.
Right.
So why do babies love to be held? Because it feels good. It's
Hmm.
calming,
Hmm.
right? So we are meant for that. We're meant for physical touch. We're meant to, emotionally being connected to other people. And when I say relationship issues, it's really across the board. Some people come
Yeah.
in with work issues, with a manager, with a colleague, or if they're a manager, managing employees. It could be people come more often than not. It's usually spousal, issues. And of course, if it's warranted, I do recommend couples therapy conjunctive with individual therapy. Or I have some clients come in with siblings, kind of more
Oh.
close family issues, or parents, kind of different difficult dynamics. So it really goes across the board
Mhm.
when it comes to relationships. So it's that one. It's almost like that one was kind of a no-brainer because it just cuts across any kind of other presentation in terms of symptoms.
Yes.
Mhm.
Okay. On a funny note, so, there's this theme in the world online in this country where the anxious woman loves to calm down watching serial killer shows and podcasts. You're laughing. Yeah, you know exactly. I'm like, there's like a whole vibe. It's like my sister's gonna die laughing when she hears this because like she's totally that. I'm like, she's like, oh, you're so anxious. Oh, how are you calming down? Oh, you're watching and listening to a serial killer podcast. Okay. This is like, right. So like I don't know. There's been this eruption of this kind of like you're laughing. So I know you have these women in your community,
Well,
right?
I
Like,
have these women, and I'm one of these. Well, not so much to calm down. I wouldn't say I listen to them to calm down. I
You
just
just find it fascinating. I'm
I
sure.
do like true crime. I definitely am a true crime listener and watcher, and actually me and my husband, one of the main things we watch is documentaries. We actually together we don't watch a whole lot of TV shows or
Yeah.
movies. We love watching documentaries in general. And of course, I think for me, it's also a little bit of more on the psychological side of things. And I'm
Yeah.
drawn to obviously kind of what's going on there. And
Uh-huh.
going back to this core piece that started all for me is just understanding human behavior and that
Mhm.
it spans are very wide, spectrum.
Yep.
There's a little bit of that. I do read books too, on those topics. So I
So do
just
you think that it's the understanding of the person, like the learning and understanding of these characters in these shows and books and novels and true crime stuff that people are like, it's almost like it's helping them calm down because they're getting to know, not getting to know the character, but kind of like understanding humans more. You know what I mean?
I do wonder. I do wonder if it's that piece. It hasn't come up as much with a lot of my clients, so I can't speak, too broadly to that. But I do wonder if there's some of that. I think that to me, in general, again, binge watching any kind of it, I feel like it's usually the reality TV or it's the true crime. That's
Right.
kind of the
Yeah.
ones that I hear, or if it's the scrolling, the TikTok, the Instagram, all of that. To me, I guess more broadly, I see those as a massive distraction from
Yeah.
what's really going on.
Yeah.
And kind of, almost kind of putting aside if it's anxiety, if it's depression, if it's, whatever we might be going through, and
Mhm.
almost kind of in a way checking out, right? And kind of immersing ourselves in this different world that's very different from our world, and
Mhm.
almost taking a break from our world, if that
Mhm.
makes sense. So I think
Absolutely. Yeah.
that's
And the
what I
fantasy
guess
stuff.
more generally I would say is the theme there, which there's a time and place. I said I do
Yeah.
I do it too. There's a time and place for it. My biggest thing with especially with anxiety that I often talk about is that avoidance is what we engage with when it comes to anxiety, but it's
Mhm.
also the biggest thing that feeds anxiety.
Mhm.
Avoidance, reassurance seeking, all of those things,
Mm.
they only work in the short term. In the long term,
Mm.
you feeding a monster. And so
Oh.
that's the biggest thing when it comes especially to anxiety. The best way to kind of cope with and get,
Mhm.
decrease anxiety is to one, obviously if the anxiety is very severe, we work first on kind of more the self-soothing strategies, things that you can do in the moment to calm down, right? But then more on the long-term piece, the best thing you can do is get comfortable with the uncertainty. Get
Yeah.
comfortable with feeling, a little anxious. We're all wired to feel a little anxious. And I often clients will come in and say, I need your help to get rid of my anxiety. And I often say, well,
Mm.
I have bad news. I cannot do that. I
Yeah.
can I can help you learn to cope with it and lower the intensity, but we can't get rid of it. Actually, that would be a horrible life because we're
Right.
wired for it. It's part of
Yeah.
the evolutionary kind of the fight or flight is kind of the very
Right.
core kind of biological anxiety that we all have, that we all need for survival. So we don't want to get rid of it. You don't want to be numb, right? We want to be feeling. It's just we don't want to get overwhelmed by our feelings. And that's the piece. And so that's kind of the distinction I make there. But just wanted to make
Beautiful.
that plug because that's the most common thing I hear probably on a daily basis. Yeah.
Yes. Okay, another question I have is there's still stigma around counseling, therapy, sessions. And I like how you said like some people think they need to be like diagnosed with something to get
Mhm.
help. And some people just think, God knows, there's a lot of opinions on that. What do you say to people? Just like as like who are maybe like questioning it, contemplating this. Like, do
Mhm.
I need to talk to someone? Is there
Mhm.
something wrong with me? I need
Mhm.
help with this area. Does it work? Will therapy work on me? All these things. So what do you say to someone who's kind of like teetering on the fence with working with
Mhm.
someone?
Yeah. No, that's a great question, and again, very common one. And I often say whenever people reach out, I often say like I give people so much credit to pick up the phone or send the email to basically a total stranger and say, help me.
Right.
Like that
Right.
is the biggest like kudos I give to people just taking that step. It's so hard. that being said, also sometimes I think we also need that stranger
Yeah.
slash neutral person to kind of hear us out, hear what's going on in our lives, and can kind of give one, kind of specific strategy. So maybe there's areas in your life that you feel unhappy with. Again, maybe you're struggling with kind of more specific anxiety or depression symptoms. Maybe you're feeling overwhelmed with like the daily, day-to-day demands, or just life is not kind of quite where you want it to be. Those will be all reasons, I think, to speak to someone.
Mhm.
And just kind of in a way, sometimes people say, I just need a sounding board. I just need to
Yeah.
talk about this thing and see if it makes sense. Other people come with kind of very specific, like, I'm struggling with very high anxiety. I need coping skills, or I'm having a lot of conflict with my, adult siblings. I need communication skills. So it really varies. Some people come with very specific ask, and for other people, it may start a little exploratory, and then we figure out, okay, where do we want to dive into? So it really varies across the board. But again, I do want to stress that there's nothing wrong with talking to a therapist. It doesn't make you crazy. It doesn't make you a weird person or any of that. And just on the diagnosis piece, I guess I'll touch too that I used to be in network with insurance, and I no longer am. And I know there's a lot of opinions out there about that. And it was a hard decision to make because I know it potentially was limiting who can access the services. But one of the main reasons I made the choice was that, especially when I'm in network, to submit a claim to insurance, I have to put a diagnosis.
Right.
So even if somebody comes into me and they really just kind of want to chat and go over things and there's no diagnosis, technically I can't see them through their insurance.
Mhm.
And then insurance also tends to dictate, what is the treatment plan? And then how quickly, basically the point of insurance is, and I know this working in the hospital setting, I used to talk to insurance all the time to get more days for people to stay in the hospital. So I know exactly the questions they're going for.
Mhm.
And I hate to say it, but their main goal is to get the person out as quickly as possible so they can stop paying.
Mhm.
That's not how change happens.
Mhm.
Change takes time.
Mhm.
And so that was one of the big factors is I don't want my treatment to be, you know, guided by or forced by
Mm.
insurance and how many sessions somebody can be seen. And then also having to give somebody a diagnosis when they really don't meet criteria for
Oh,
diagnosis.
wow.
Um,
Ooh.
so now,
Yeah.
as a private pay, I do give people super bills, and I do give the disclaimer. If I give you a super bill to submit for reimbursement, same deal. I have to put a diagnosis down. And I have some clients who choose not to do that for those reasons, and other
Mhm.
clients don't care. And it's like, okay, that's fine. But that's one thing I also want to mention. I know there's a lot of, and I even see in some of the groups, Facebook groups I'm in, I know, I understand obviously the cost is higher. But the other piece allows me to see a little bit less people, but then I can devote my attention more
Mhm.
to each person. I take very detailed notes. I'm able to remember most of people's details. I also have a freakish memory. I do warn my clients about that too, because sometimes I'll bring something up and clients will say like, how do you remember this 6 months later? And so I often warn people, be careful what you tell me, because I'll bring it up 6 months later. There's a little bit of that trap, but again, allows me to provide the care that I really feel good providing and that I feel like is quality care. So I just kind of wanted to mention that as well, because I know for some people that will make it less accessible. So it's a tightrope to walk for sure.
I know so many people, though, that their therapist is liquid gold to them. They would pay anything. It's like this coveted hour of the week that people just cherish,
Mhm.
right? And I think when you can get there, and I'm a coach, so I hear people like a lot of my clients, they have a therapist
Mhm.
and they have me, and we work side to side. And it's
Yep.
amazing when they're like, "Oh, my therapist said that too." You know what I mean? I'm like, "Yeah, we're picking up on
Mhm.
their patterns and some of the same things." Um,
Right.
okay, I love that you switched a bit more to entrepreneurial because that's where I was going to go with my line of questioning next. But first, I need to know, what's your astrology sign? What's your
I'm a
sign?
Virgo.
You're a Virgo. Of course you're a Virgo. Your work is like your background right now is Virgo. I looked at your website yesterday or the other day and I was like, yeah, okay, yeah, yeah, yeah. You're so Virgo. This is great. I'm Capricorn. So like my business world. And yes. Okay. So with that, you went off and did a private practice, right? And this was like obviously after the COVID era. But before the COVID era, it sounds like you had that anyway. what were some of the blocks you faced? Because we have a lot of entrepreneurs listening to this podcast. What were some
Mhm,
of the blocks you faced, even fears you faced,
mhm.
just going off and doing your own thing?
Yeah. Well, there's definitely, and I also work with clinicians who are starting out their practices or kind of a little bit early in the career. And one of the things they share that again I can relate to when I first, it was a little bit different when I first started because I was still in the hospital. And I had just floated through a bunch of the units, so people knew me, and so it was much easier to get referrals. It was basically I didn't have to do any marketing; I was just right there. Um, so that was a little bit different. I definitely had to do some learning, and I had to do, as I said, kind of the second iteration of my practice, or kind of the post-COVID iteration of my practice when I fully went on my own. I had to learn a little bit of how do I get myself out there as kind of outgoing as I am. At the same time, it is hard to put yourself out and knowing, where to begin. And there's also, I think, a lot of advice. I think the problem is also sometimes deciding which advice to take, especially when it comes to starting a therapy practice. There's bazillion Facebook groups out there. I'm in a couple of them and they've been very helpful. But even literally, I'm in just two of them. Even those two, sometimes it felt like drinking from a fire hose, right? And
Mhm.
so knowing how to slow
Mm,
down, how to make, I think the biggest, I guess, advice I would give is pausing throughout the process and really thinking about what do you want, like what is important to you, how do you want your practice to look, because I'm willing to bet there's things that I do in my practice or the way I approach things. If I go out and ask 10 people about it, five might say this is great and five might say, well, you could do it a little
right.
bit. So there's a lot of noise, I guess, out there, and
Mhm,
it could be
mhm.
overwhelming. It could be so overwhelming, and I definitely the first couple of years, probably felt that way too. And kind of it took a while, even going back to like why these three topics that I focused on, even that took some time.
Right.
Versus, and even, what trainings do you do and what things do you do? And it's just so much out there. And so I often, that's my advice to people, especially when you're first starting whatever business, doesn't have to be therapy or private practice, anything is be very selective where you get your advice and then kind of sticking with it for a while.
Mhm,
So not kind of jumping from one thing to the next because change again takes time.
mhm,
Starting a business takes
mhm.
time, right? Building a network takes time.
Mm.
And so kind of being patient. I think the patience piece is obviously the hardest for all of us. But I
Wow.
think it's key as well. And just staying connected to your values and what's important to you. Like how do you want to run your business, whatever that is, whatever that looks like.
Yes. So if I'm hearing you correctly, you mentor
Yes,
other counselors and
I do.
therapists.
I do. Yes. Yeah.
Yes. Beautiful. What are some gifts that you got from this entrepreneurial journey?
A couple of things come to mind. Well, first, I absolutely love working with my clients and seeing the changes they're making and kind of celebrating them along the way. I know that's a little bit selfish, right? Because it makes me feel good, and not because I feel like
No.
I'm the best therapist out there, but it's more like, yay, you did that, right? Like, and seeing
Yes.
people, especially again, the beauty of working with somebody a little bit more long term, seeing the trajectory and seeing the changes that people are making, it just fills my heart. Like it's just so rewarding. I have had through I think it's the group that we connected with through Boston Businesswomen and a
Mhm,
couple other networking groups. I've been able to connect with so many wonderful local businesses and local providers and just kind of getting to know the community
mhm.
better. And said that was part of my goals when I first kind of reopened. I knew I'd have to almost kind of reestablish myself in this area. And so that's been really wonderful. And yeah, just kind of being able to do all of these things. I've been very fortunate. I found a lovely office. I had to switch gears last year. I was subletting and needed to find an office. And again, it was just literally like draw of the luck. Like this woman had just
Wow.
posted this. It looked, a little too good to be true. There was no pictures, which is always, a little bit. And when I looked at it, and it was exactly what I was looking for, and it was what I can afford, and it worked out wonderful. I'm in a suite with four other therapists, so I feel like
Cool.
people around me. We have a proper waiting room now, so it's very nice to I just feel more settled. I feel more settled in that way too. So, but I feel like it was a total luck of the draw finding her listing just when she had posted it. So there's always kind of those little things that we need to celebrate along, celebrating the wins, right? Small
Absolutely.
and big. Yeah.
And you magnetize, that was a frequency thing. You magnetize that to you. That was a match, baby. Oh, okay. I love to ask all of my guests on here is like, what's next for you? Like what's a future vision you're going after or a goal or like an accomplishment that you have your eyes set on?
That's a great question. I think one of the things, because again, in a way, I am limited how many clients I could see a week, both from just a mental standpoint, how many clients can I see to still provide the quality care that I want to provide. Also, my son is still little; he's 5, so
Mhm.
I'm still juggling preschool and early school schedules. I'm also pretty involved with the nonprofit organization I mentioned earlier that owns the college I went to. I've actually become a member, and then I've held a number of leadership roles, and so I'm currently on the board of trustees for one of their scholarships, so that takes up a lot of my time.
Mhm.
So that being said, I am limited how many people I could see a week.
Mhm.
And while on one hand that's great, but on the other hand, I also feel how do I make more of an impact? Again, kind of going back to kind of my initial spark and my initial, mission with doing all of this. So one of my goals this year, and it's kind of started, I guess, midway last year, is to get out a little bit more, or
Mhm.
even talking to you, honestly,
Yeah.
is part of that, and just doing a little bit more of that kind of public speaking or workshops, or kind of, I've been, playing around with this idea of kind of taking the therapy room to the bigger world, if that makes sense.
Yes.
Um, so that's kind of what I've been toying with. It's still that's still work in progress and trying to figure out what's the best way to do that and what that looks like. But
Oh,
that's
goodness.
that's what's that's what's on my mind right now, and it has been the last few months. So we'll see where that goes.
Oh, Vessi, this is what gets my wheels turning because this is what I like to help people with, right? Okay, first of all, because I have other clients and what I
Mhm,
I have I have other clients that are therapists
mhm.
specifically. And what I help them do is record their brilliance. Oh, can you hear my son screaming in the other room? Hopefully you can't hear him screaming.
No.
Okay, good. His dad's got him, but they come and find me and scream mommy at the door.
Yeah.
So what I help other therapists do is get the things that they're repeating on a regular basis recorded out of them
Mhm,
via small videos or PDFs, right? So that
mhm,
it can help their clients
mhm,
in between their sessions,
mhm,
like attend and do like some self therapy sessions, some self coaching, some self, processing about these things, but also
yeah,
helping you guys like record your brilliance and these special areas that you do want to share with the world more and
mhm,
get that out, almost like having you work for you, but you don't have to be on all the time.
mhm,
You know what I
mhm.
mean? And I
Yeah.
love that. I love your mission with like getting the therapy room to the bigger audience, bigger scale. This is like I'm not joking when I think you guys are going to be really busy over the next decade or two.
Unfortunately, yes. I often joke. I wish I can retire. I wish people didn't need me, but here we are.
Yeah, no, no retiring yet. But at the same time, as you guys are hearing her say that, like she's got so many hours a week and she's got so many clients and she's a mom and she's part of these other great missions. There's only so many times. And there are ways, beautiful ways, right, to get your brilliance out of you bottled so you can deliver it in different ways and get you on stages just like this.
Yes,
Right? Where people can
exactly.
work with you in different manners, like even you having a group coaching session a few times a week. Oh my God, or group therapy, you know what I mean? And getting them collectively together in person or online. Oh, honey, now we're talking. But
Now we're
okay,
talking.
now we're talking. So you come find me after this episode and we can talk about that. But my brain
Absolutely.
explodes for you guys. And when I hear that, right? So, okay. How can people get in touch with you? What are the best ways for them to find you? What are your handles? What are your websites? I'm going to make sure I'm following you right now. So why don't you
Yes.
let us know what are the best ways to find you?
All right. Best way is probably my website's a starting point. So it's www.vhjones.com. I know it's a lot of letters. Also, if you just Google my name, it will pop up. And I am also on LinkedIn. Again, if you just pull up my name, it'll come up, Facebook, and then Instagram as well.
Okay, wait. I'm gonna look right now. BES. I don't know if you and I are following each other. There you are. I think we already are. No, I just
I
found
think
you,
we
right?
are on Instagram, I think. Yes.
Great. I'm following you and making sure I do. Yes. Okay. I'll make sure that your website is linked in this bio, right?
Thank you.
In the show notes, everyone can go have access to it. So let's see. Maybe leave these listeners, these good little listeners, with your most hopeful. This is might put you on the spot. Your most hopeful message for the future, for the next few years out, for all our anxiety ladies out there listening. What's a message of hope you like to deliver to the people you talk to?
That, well, one, you're never alone. There's
Mm,
always somebody out there.
mhm,
So if you feel alone, there's somebody out there who can help. And especially again, when it comes to anxiety, my biggest thing is always, like as I mentioned, I do a lot of work around mindfulness. And so I often say, your breath is always there for you. That's your
mm,
home base. So if
yeah.
everything else fails, if nothing else is available, your breath is always there. And it could be as simple as doing my favorite one is a square breath. So
Mm,
4 counts in, you hold for 4, you exhale for 4, and you hold for 4 at the bottom, and you do it again.
yep.
Another one is 4 counts in, brief pause, and then 6 counts out. So you kind of make the
Yes.
exhale a little longer than the
Yep.
inhale. And then the biggest thing is making sure we're breathing in our bellies and not our chest.
Mm-hmm.
Because again, when we're anxious and when we're stressed, we tend to do a lot of shallow breathing up in our chest, but
Mm-hmm.
that's what's getting our heart rate going. And when our heart rate is
Yeah.
going, it's sending the signal to the brain that says danger. And then our
Yep.
brain starts going. And then we've got a whole cycle going. So again, I often say when all else fails, pause and take a couple of those deep breaths. I know it's a bit of a cliche, but that's it.
It's
That's it right
not.
there. That's
Yeah.
all. It's right there for us. And we take it for granted. I think we
Yeah.
typically go through our days taking it for granted. So I hope that makes sense. But that's one of the
Yes.
recurring things I talk to pretty much all my clients about. Yeah.
I'm a former yoga teacher, so I
So
get it.
you know all about that.
Yeah. And I offer breath work too. I have a breath work specialist come in and lead one monthly breath work for all of our entrepreneurs in our
Oh,
group.
beautiful. Love it. I
Cool,
love it.
right? Because it's transformational to connect to your
Excellent.
breath.
Yep.
Oh, well, this was so much fun talking to you.
Likewise.
I am so glad you came on this podcast and you saw my post. And also, I'm going to have to get Christina on this podcast because
You
I'm
really
going to have,
do.
right? Oh, I have so many beautiful Boston women to connect with, and it's thanks to her. So, shout out to the Boston Business Women's Group. Yes.
Absolutely.
Okay. I'm so glad I got to connect with you. I know the audience is just going to love this. Guys, you can reach out to her in her link in bio, and hopefully maybe we'll have you on next year and do another check-in and see where you are. Thank you for joining
Lovely.
us, Vesi, today, and everyone, our audience. We will talk to you on our next episode. Bye.